Hi everyone, I'm Shelly and you're watching There's No Place Like Home. A while back I got into a debate about homeschooling in public school, as I do from time to time, and the person that I was conversing with made a comment to the effect of, were it not for your experience with public school, you wouldn't even know how to homeschool. And at the time I thought that it was absurd. But the more that I think about it, the more that I think that person might actually have had a point, just not in the way that they think. So today I'm going to share with you how public school taught me how not to homeschool. People who don't know much about homeschooling will often envision that it looks a lot like what happens in a traditional school setting. And for some families, it does. In fact, when I first started homeschooling, my homeschool did look a lot like the traditional school setting. Because at first, I probably would have agreed with this person and I would have said, yes, the things that I am doing at home are because I learned them in school or because I saw them doing these things with my kids while they were in school. But after a while, the very techniques that I was using that I had picked up from our public school system were the very things that brought us down and ended up causing burnout and having me send my kids back to school for those 2 years. So in the end, what I realized is that if anything, public school and my experience with it, with both my kids being in it and with my own experience in it, it taught me how not to homeschool. And I'm just going to go over a few of those ways today, not all of them. I could probably drone on about it forever, but these are just the ways that came to the top of my head. So the first one is that it taught me not to expect my kids to fit a mold. So many kids in school are suffering because they are expected to learn in a certain way. They are expected to learn in a certain timeline. They are expected to just look like everybody else and to learn things at the exact same time as everybody else. In our homeschool setting, though, I've realized that kids aren't all the same. They're not supposed to be the same. God created us all to be individuals. Children do grow on their own timeline. Some of them do follow the timeline that they use in school. Some children are more advanced. Some children take a little bit longer. Some kids are great learning in the way that they do in school. A lot of kids, I'd have to say most kids, will do better with other methods. And being home with my children and teaching them in this manner has allowed me to explore those ways and to go beyond the factory style schooling that so many children are exposed to. So the second thing is that it taught me not to rely on what other people think my children should be learning. So we have school boards deciding what children should be learning about. Sometimes we have teachers making those decisions. We have the people writing the textbooks or the textbook publishers. They are deciding what should and should not go in these textbooks. So the kids who are in school really have to just deal with what other people think that they should be learning about all the time. But we as homeschool parents, we can decide what our children will be learning. We can decide what is most important for our kids to learn. Our children can have a say in it. And when your kids can have a say in it, it has a huge effect on their retention. So the third thing is that it taught me not to disregard my kids' questions and opinions. I think that so often kids who have differing opinions in school are looked down upon or they are silenced. And we can't look at children in that way. Children very often have such fantastic insight that if you would actually take the time to listen to them and to consider what they say, you would realize that they've got a great point. There are two sides to everything that you are looking at. Sometimes things are multifaceted. It's not even just two sides. And very often your children can bring those ideas to you, things that you never even thought of before. So yeah, it taught me not to disregard my kids' questions and opinions. When my kids ask questions, I listen and I answer to the best of my ability. So another way is that it taught me not to perpetuate failed methods like drill and kill. I did this at first. I got those math workbooks. It's usually with math. And it's because of the memorization. They want you to memorize, which in math, it is important that you memorize certain things. It makes it much easier if you have your addition and subtraction and multiplication and division memorized. With that being said, though, a lot of times the school system seems to really drive it into the ground, and it takes your child's love of doing math and just throws it out the window. A lot of kids, when they are younger, really like to do math. I remember that when my one daughter was young, math was her favorite subject, but as she got older in the school system, she liked math less and less because she got tired of having to do, 50 problems a day. Or maybe in school she would do 50 problems, and then when she would come home at night, she would have homework, and then she would have like 30 or 40 more problems to do. So it really has given us the freedom to know when to stop. And the key thing that I look for in my kids is when they start, you can see it in your kids, when their eyes start to glaze over, when they start to get really, really frustrated. A frustrated child is not going to be able to concentrate or retain information. That is when it is time to stop. So in our house, at least, there is no drill and kill. Another thing is that it taught me not to rely on biased materials, but to promote reasoning, objectivity, and research instead. We are living in an era, and it may have always been this way, and we just didn't know it, in which a lot of the history books that we have and a lot of the science books that we have, just in general, history and science I'll start with. I'm sure that it extends to more areas than that. They are very biased, no matter which side you look on. And the fact is that we really, at this point in time, don't know what is the truth. So what I have taught my children is that we have to learn how to look at things, as I mentioned before, to look at things from both sides and to use reasoning, to look at the evidence, to think about how these things could possibly have happened. Yes, we go to the library an awful lot, and we typically will try to use living books rather than textbooks, especially when it comes to history, because I hope at least that some of the biographies are more dependable than what you might find in a textbook. The primary documents are likely to be much more dependable than what you would find in a textbook. But in the end, what it really comes down to is you can't feel beholden to any sort of curriculum and have this mentality that curriculum that you are using is 100% the truth, no questions asked, because unfortunately, we just don't have that guarantee. So another thing is that it taught me not to ignore my kids' interests. How many times do kids who go to school, like when they first start going to school, they're really excited about things and they want to learn about different subjects or different topics, but they can't really do that when they're in school. They might have to wait. Like if you have a child who really loves snakes, they might have to wait to learn about reptiles until, say, the following year. And then they get like 2 pages on it, and then they move on to something else. And when you are in a homeschool, I mentioned this before, you can have your child's opinion. You can ask them for their opinion, and you can use their interests to tailor their curriculum to not only fit the way that they learn, but the things that they want to learn about, because I will say it again, they will remember things so much better if they actually want to learn about them. We don't have to stick with those things that are typically taught in schools. There's learning to be found in everything. Another thing that I learned was not to focus more on rules than on relationships. There are a lot of what seem to be arbitrary rules in schools. And some teachers are very flexible with them. I had a 6th grade teacher who was very flexible with rules. Other teachers, though, are very, very strict when it comes to rules. When my oldest daughter, she was in middle school, and they had to wear uniforms to school, and she had a teacher who every morning would go around the class and she would check all of the students' socks to make sure that they were wearing the right color socks socks with their uniforms. And then she would make them change their socks. She had a basket of socks. She would make them put on the correct color socks. That is when you are going a little bit too far with the rules. And I had to learn, that's something that I had to learn in my own time, was to not focus so much on the rules, because I mentioned how I started out looking more like school. And yeah, so at first I had my kids raise their hands to go to the bathroom. I had my kids raise their hands to ask questions. I brought a lot of those rules from school into my home, unfortunately. And I did it because, first of all, I wanted homeschooling to at least be familiar to my kids, because they were used to doing that in school. And I was also hoping that it would bring some structure into our home and into our homeschool routine. But in the end, what it did, at least for me as a type A personality, was that it did cause me to focus so much on those rules that I was forgetting about the relationship with my kids. And that is the most important thing. And so the last thing that I'm going to talk about today that it taught me was, it taught me not to intimidate my kids into apathy. You might be wondering, what the heck am I talking about? Well, here's what I mean. I remember when we were in school, there were some kids in class who they might have raised a ruckus, or they might have asked questions that seemed kind of off topic at the times. And the teacher always seemed to look down on them. And what ended up happening was that the entire class then would start looking down on that person. So every time that child would act out, the teacher would use some sort of intimidation technique to get them to stop. And I remember my 4th grade teacher, I always thought he was a really nice teacher, until one day he actually brought a pacifier to our class and gave it to one of the boys who was always acting up, and the little boy put it in his mouth. So that is an intimidation. And so what ends up happening is that these kids, because they are treated in such a way, they just become completely apathetic, and they are not open to learning anymore. If a child is depressed, if a child feels uncomfortable, if they feel that they are not being valued, they're not going to care about what's going on. And the same thing really happens, when you have children who are reading aloud, for example. And you might remember when you used to go through the desk, like the child in front of you might read one paragraph, and then behind the student behind them would read the next paragraph, and they would just go around the class like that. And every once in a while, you might find a child who is having difficulty reading. And some teachers, again, are great with this, but there are other teachers who will openly scoff at children who do these things. And again, this is one of those intimidation techniques that is used, and it will eventually make this particular child, or any child really who learns in that way, they don't care anymore. They know that their voice is not going to be heard. They know that the class, and possibly even the teacher, are going to laugh and scoff at them. So they kind of just melt to the back, and the whole passion of learning that they may have had when they were a child will all but vanish by the time that they are in high school, because they just don't care anymore. They just want to slink to the back. They want to get through school, and they want to forget it. And that's not something that I want for my children. At my age, I still love to learn. I'm always researching things. I'm always looking into things, and I want my kids to feel the same way about learning. And unfortunately, a lot of children in school nowadays just don't have that feeling anymore. That's all that I have for you today. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up. If you haven't subscribed yet and would like to hear more of what I have to say, I would love if you would do that. If you have any questions or comments, you can leave one over on Instagram, or possibly here. I'm so used to saying that, but lately I've had comments. Surprise, surprise. And if you like my work and would like to check out my Patreon page, I will leave a link in the description box for that as well. And I hope you have a great day.